Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the master of fun and wonder, the existential Mr. Rogers, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, here with episode number 251 of Robservations, the show about something. My God, 251. Well, I got Gilbert and Tallulah here. They're barking. It wouldn't be a show without them barking, right, Gilbert? That's right, buddy. But anyway, I'm very excited. We're on the downslope of 300 episodes. I couldn't do it without you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. And of course, you all know that this is made possible by Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com and buy any of their products, when you check out, you can punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, and you will get 20% off your order. Now, clearly, today's episode, is a little change of pace. I'm not talking about Star Wars. I'm not talking about Star Trek yet. I'll get to that later with your letters. I got a letter from Willa Yang. I was thinking about the truth. What is the truth? What is truth? And not from necessarily a college philosophy point of view, although you could call it that. Truth. I've always thought that there's a hierarchy of truth, really. The number one, the top of the hierarchy of truth is physical truth. You can't deny it. Fire is hot. Ice is cold. If you jump from a tall building, gravity will bring you into the concrete and you will die. If you go too high up in the atmosphere, you'll also die. If you go too low under the ocean without the proper, even if you have the proper accoutrements, you will eventually die. Those are physical truths. Can't escape them. And everybody knows what they are. You're driving fast in a car, you're hurtling into a brick wall. If you're going at a certain speed, you will die. Those are pretty much the physical truths, and they don't always involve death. Now, scientific truths are the examination of those physical truths. Why are they? And the thing about scientific truths is they're malleable. They're based on our information that we have of the observable world. And there's a lot in the world that we cannot observe. There's also things that we don't know how to observe. So the scientific truths are less real to me than the physical truths, even though scientific truths go hand in hand with the real truths. The bottom of my hierarchy of truth is anything that people say. Things that people say are very seldom true, at least demonstrably true, because every person you meet perceives the world in a different way. You never know. Like, for instance, you and your perception colors the truth of any. You could meet somebody. You could have 10 people walk up to the same person and ask a very innocuous question. Say, "How's your day going?" That person could give them a one-word answer. And all 10 of those people that walk up to the person and ask how their day is could come back with a different reaction to, like, for instance, say any of you ask me, if you could jump to the screen and go, "Hey, Rob, how's your day going, man?" And if I were to say, "Great," depending on where you're coming from, you could hear that my great might sound to you like great, 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 depending on how you perceive the world. Or depending on how you perceive me. So then when you're asked, "Hey, what is Rob Burnett? How's his day going?" There might be 10 different answers based on people's perception. That's the world that we live in. Now, anybody who reads science fiction or watches science fiction movies all the way back, Fritz Lang's, I really think that even though there was George Méliès and there was other science fiction movies, I really think that the age of the modern science fiction film began all the way back in 1927 with Fritz Lang's Metropolis. As I said, there were other movies like The Lost World, things like that. But Metropolis really had a lot on its mind and a lot to say, even about, you go back and you talk about artificial intelligence, what does it all mean? You can go all the way back to 1927. They were grappling with those topics. And anyone who reads a lot of sci-fi knows that human truth is very malleable. And you watch The Matrix, you find out that, oh, everything you thought was true is not true, because you don't where your physical perception of the world was wrong, or the input was being fed to you was a lie. So the truth in science fiction, fantasy, and horror has always been an undercurrent to almost every story that's told. When you're dealing with a supernatural story transcends physical truth. So immediately, I mean, that's what I've always loved about sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, is that it really ultimately it deals with the truth of existence, especially human existence. And the one thing about human existence is one thing that we know is human beings are seldom truthful. I mean, really, 100% truthful. It's like, your significant other gets a haircut. Hey, what do you think about my haircut? Oh, it's great. Do I look fat in this dress? No. Do I have morning breath? Absolutely not. Did you get fired from your job today? Well, define fired. So human beings are constantly trying to reinvent their own lives. But there are things in the world, such as like the paper of note. The New York Times used to be a paper of note. People would look to the New York Times for the truth. Some did anyway, at some point in time, I think. So the idea of truth is very, I think, important. We're always seeking the truth from each other, but human beings seldom give the total truth to anyone because of various reasons. We're embarrassed. It could hurt us, whether it's politically, socially, financially, romantically, whatever. You can't tell the truth 100% of the time. You just can't. We can't. You can't be human beings and do that. You just can't. However, human beings, we're living in a world. We are living in a science fiction world. We are living in a world where the technology I'm using to talk to you right now, that you're watching on YouTube, is astonishing that it exists, and it's relatively recent. We're talking about technology that has only existed for 15 years total, maybe less than that. One of the greatest communication devices, or not devices, communication mediums. The medium is message, whatever. Facebook. Whatever you think of Facebook, and let's talk about any kind of social network system, but Facebook is probably the largest, if not I think it is. I think it's the largest. It touches more people on the planet Earth than any other medium, any other exchange, information exchange, whatever. So the idea is that since it's connected literally all over the world, the hope would be, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of Facebook. Maybe not as much as I used to be, but when Facebook was new and you could finally get it if you weren't a college student, I was an early adopter of Facebook. I love Facebook. I love the way I can keep in touch with friends all over the world. I love that the Post-Geek Singularity has a Facebook group and there's always somebody posting something on it. Fantastic. I like that I put memories a decade ago on Facebook and then they pop up like, oh, remember when you did this? There's something, there is constant reaffirmation of some kind. Of course, there's always a downside. You have to read people's crazy uninformed political screeds and all that. So you take the good with the bad, kind of like life or anyone. But here's the thing. I would hope that a communications hub or Facebook, its position in humanity, it has a huge responsibility, and we have seen, whether you believe whether you believe in whatever your political affiliation, I give it up. We pretty much know when we talk about interference in our elections, what we really are talking about is we are talking about bad actors using our communications technology to disseminate willfully untrue information to foment discord amongst our population. Now, here's the thing. That's not illegal. And as a matter of fact, I give it up to the Russian hackers who thought of it. I mean, you go back and you read, the more articles you read about Russian troll farms and all that, it's brilliant. I give it up to them because we were so happy about all these new communication systems because our first impulse is like, this is great. This is so awesome. I love all of this. I love all this information and clicks and likes and pokes. And I can look at baby photos from my niece and nephew, whatever the hell it is. Facebook, you think is great, right? Well, as with anything, the smart, motivated people think, wow, what can we use? How can we use this amazing device and not just devices, this amazing communications medium, Facebook and YouTube, to get to people, It's easy. It is easy. So of course, if you read about what they actually did, I give it up, man. Nicely done. Well done, folks. And I really actually appreciate it. And I can't get mad because it was a stunning use of a tool. And I feel that way about most things, even when bad actors do something that is bad. Like I don't know if it's possible, but I always used to hear about how somebody figures out how to siphon 1 penny out of everybody in the world's bank account. Maybe that's science fiction, but maybe something like that's true. Give it up to those people. So they made $1 billion in pennies stealing. I'm like, wow, somebody figured that out. I hand it to them. And if you're a science fiction film or science fiction fan, literature fan, there is all kinds of stories about truth and the dissemination of information that is untrue and lives that are untrue and all kinds of things that aren't true. And it's a big part of, well, it's a big part of any literature, not just science fiction. But science fiction has always had sort of been on the cutting edge of untruths, the ability of technology to provide untruths for people. I mean, what's really interesting is I think back to a movie that I like more than I probably should, which is Rising Sun, based on Michael Crichton's book of the same name. It was a movie the movie that was made from the book stars Wesley Snipes and Sean Connery, and it's all about Japanese companies taking over America and new technology and how new technology can be used to make untruths, to make things that aren't true. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons that shows like CSI and every number, whether it's CSI or SVU or whatever, the idea of uncovering the truth is at the core of any detective story. Detective Jim could probably speak to this. That the great truths, are in fact discoverable. And I think that's why detective stories are so irresistible, because there is a murder and we know people are lying and the truth must be uncovered. Inherently, as far as a narrative goes, that's a pretty good way to start. And the reason I was thinking about this is last night I showed Elizabeth, I think it's on Amazon Prime, Young Sherlock Holmes. Young Sherlock Holmes was a movie that Steven Spielberg produced that Barry Levinson, who directed like Rain Man and Diner, directed based on a script by Chris Columbus, who wrote and directed the first 2 Harry Potter movies. It was a 1985 film about a young Sherlock Holmes who's in at boarding school, and he meets a young John Watson, and it shows how they develop their friendship, and I mean, it's one of these movies that shows how the formation of Holmes, but it's a delightful movie. I always loved this movie when it came out. It was back when Amblin Entertainment was producing a lot of interesting movies by other directors like Gremlins, Batteries Not Included. No, I'm kidding about that. But Young Sherlock Holmes, and I was thinking about, okay, it just got me thinking about the truth and how that's a big part of storytelling, uncovering truths. It's an irresistible story. I just, finished, I talk about Marianne, the French series, and all ghost stories in a way are all about the uncovering of the truth. The reason ghosts are here is because there's some kind of unrest that was caused by untruths or injustices that have not been uncovered. So, I've always thought those things were interesting. Well, right before I went on today, on Deadline, Ted Johnson writes an article, and this was posted at 11:31 Pacific time today, 11:31 a.m., so just a couple hours ago. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg says people should decide what is credible, not tech companies. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg isn't backing away from the company's decision to accept political ads without fact-checking the spots, arguing that people should decide what is credible, not tech companies. Well, let me read the rest of this article. That to me, I was like, wow, that's horrifying. That's horrifying. That would be like a food company saying people should decide whether this food is edible or not. Why is it art? Why should we? I mean, even though we're selling it to you, we're giving it to you. Why do we have a responsibility to sell you healthy food? Why don't people figure out whether it's good for them or not? Well, I'll tell you why. Because you assume that if you're buying food from a food company, that they're giving you food that's edible. You're putting your trust in them. That's what you're hoping for. I think the same should be true of any company that is disseminating information. But let me read the rest of this article. Zuckerberg has been a frequent presence lately in Washington, meeting with activists, lawmakers, and even President Donald Trump as the company comes under fire for a host of issues, perhaps first and foremost, how the company will handle political content and disinformation in advance of the 2020 presidential election. In a speech at Georgetown University, Zuckerberg argued that while the company has a role in policing violent content, blatant hoaxes, and other material, he takes a broader view of what should be allowed when it comes to political speech. The company has come under fire and on the left for allowing the proliferation of content that may have considered hate speech or even blatantly false, while it's also facing pressure from the right for an alleged political bias. When it's not absolutely clear what to do, we should err on the side of free expression, Zuckerberg says. So Facebook, which is a privately owned company that is providing a public service, should err on the side of free expression and not police their own information that they're disseminating. Got it. Senator Elizabeth Warren has targeted Facebook on a number of fronts, including its decision to allow one of President Trump's political ads that accused Joe Biden and son Hunter of wrongdoing in Ukraine. The Biden campaign asked Facebook to remove the ad, but it refused, as did YouTube and Twitter. CNN declined to air it. Warren went so far as to purchase her own ad on Facebook that included a falsehood that Zuckerberg was backing Trump in the 2020 election. In his speech, Zuckerberg said that given the sensitivities around political ads, I've considered whether we should stop allowing them altogether. From a business perspective, the controversy certainly is not worth the very small part of the business they make up. Well, that's good, Mark. I like what you're saying. I think people should see for themselves what politicians are saying, he said. He argued that banning political ads favors incumbents and whoever the media chooses to cover. I think that people should see for themselves what politicians are saying, he said. He said that when it comes to misinformation on its platform, a problem is determining where a line should be drawn. He noted that even media outlets take different approaches to a news story on the same topic. We have found that a different strategy works, focusing on the authenticity of the speaker rather than focusing on the content itself, he said. He devoted much of his speech to the history of freedom of expression, implicitly characterizing Facebook as part of a larger trend where people are offered ever-expanding means of sharing their points of view. People no longer have to rely on traditional gatekeepers in politics or media to make their voices heard, and that has important consequences. He also warned that in times of social turmoil, our impulse is often to pull back on free expression. We want the progress that comes from free expression, but we don't want the tension. Too bad. Political reported earlier this week that Zuckerberg has been meeting with a number of conservative media figures and activists to talk about an array of issues, including whether the platform has a political bias. That in turn has triggered some suspicions on the left that Zuckerberg has been trying to soothe tensions as Trump has blasted the platform and other tech companies. The Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission are already conducting antitrust investigations of Facebook, along with a group of state attorneys general. Zuckerberg will appear on Friday for an interview with Fox News' Dana Perino for her show, The Daily Briefing. Now, here's the thing. I don't think that wanting to preserve whatever semblance of the truth that exists is a bad thing or is a partisan political issue. I don't. Because we are moving into a world, I mean, obviously things like deep fake videos, where the truth of human beings, not the physical truth of the world and not the scientific truth of the world, but the truth that is lowest on at least my hierarchy of truth, is going away. Truth gone out the window. There will be no truth. And what's really interesting for me, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, to be talking about truth, people are like, but you like things that are real. No, what I like is I like being able to lie the most effectively. Verisimilitude is the ultimate example of lying perfectly. And in movies, somebody once said that movies, because they run it, movies after the silent era, we settled on a format. Movies ran at 24 frames a second. Somebody once said, you'll have to look this up, that movies are lying 24 times a second. Because everything you see on a movie screen is not real. It's untrue. Even if you're just pointing a camera in the direction off the Grand Canyon, sure, what you're seeing there is really the Grand Canyon. It's really there. But somebody decided, where's the frame line going to be? How high or low is the camera? It's not the real world as it exists. It's the way somebody chose to present it to you. And you could call that a lie or not a lie, but to me, the best movies are the movies that lie the best. Everything in a movie is fake. And when I say it's fake, look, if you shoot in a practical location, you go into a real restaurant, sure, it's a real restaurant, but the scene that you're setting with your characters, your actors, your extras, whatever happens in that, the action that takes place, it's all made up. None of it's real. It's all made up. And when I say I'm the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, what I'm talking about is I like the movies that lie the best. And the movies that I like the most have the human. It's very funny because I'm looking for basic human truths that seem to me to be self-evident. When movies do them well, it's ironic that the great movies that are lies 24 frames a second are able to illuminate the great human truths so effectively. And I love that. I love that about movies. Let's tell the best lies possible so the truth of human existence may be revealed. That's why I love movies so much. But we are now moving into a world, as science fiction has commonly dealt with, of where the truth is going to be gone. And what does that mean for us? Now, do I want Facebook to go away? Well, sometimes I spend too much time on it, or it makes me angry, or reading lies that have been recently printed about me over and over again on Facebook by certain people. What are you going to do? You could say, that's not true. Yes, it is. No, it's not. I mean, I did something today to combat those lies that you'll see later. And it'll be, I didn't do it. I helped somebody else do it, but it's kind of fun. It's very interesting to me. And it's shocking that Mark Zuckerberg says people should decide what is credible, not tech companies. People are getting information from Facebook. They're getting information. Just like when somebody's going to sell you an apple, you hope that if you buy an organic apple, that it hasn't been covered with some kind of horrific herbicide or pesticide or whatever that is going to eventually give you cancer. Why would somebody want to give you an apple that would do that? Well, it's a lot cheaper to use pesticides or herbicides on apples to keep pests off of them, so you'll want to buy them. I mean, the irony of human existence is that everybody wants money. And what is money for? Money is it's very funny. The ultimate example, if you're incredibly wealthy, basically you get to live your life in comfort and be indulged, which it's funny. If you're the richest person in the world, it's not going to help you say alleviate. Some people try, let's cure AIDS in Africa or bring potable water to everyone. People like, Microsoft, Bill Gates does things. He's so rich. Like, what else are you going to do? Why not help humanity? Leave a legacy behind. I mean, I'm on one of these opinions. I'm of the opinion that isn't it cool that the Great Pyramids of Giza have been around for 4,000 years? In Rome, in ancient Rome, 2,000 years ago, the pyramids were already 2,000 years old. That freaks me out. I love that, but it freaks me out. And I just think I believe in humanity. I like humanity, but I'll tell you what humanity cannot do. People cannot decide what is credible if the information that they're being given by tech companies isn't. All we can do is make you makes you suspect. You know, if somebody is shoveling you shit, which is what Mark Zuckerberg is saying. Why should we? Well, because you're an information platform. You've established yourself as a place where people can exchange information. And if you are knowingly and willingly accepting paid ads from somebody who is lying to people, I mean, I guess that's okay, I suppose. I find it to be immoral. I find it to be wrong on every level. But more importantly, we are entering an era. I don't know what's going to happen. I think the next 25 years, I've always thought I'd be dead at 75. I'll be lucky if I make 75. So, I've got maybe, so the last third of my life, that's basically what I got look forward to. So I know that for the next third of my life, the world is going to be in a constant state of tumultuous upheaval between advances in biotechnology, computer technology, and combinations of the two, all kinds of disruptive technology. We are going to be living the next 25 years or the next 50 years or however long. It's going to be an interesting, as we try and grapple, as our technology outpaces our ability to deal with our technology and what it's bringing to us. Because we don't have technology czars. We don't have anybody that's sitting down and monitoring what the truth is. We're getting all this new stuff. It's like what Jeff Goldblum said. It's what Ian Malcolm said. Just because you never thought whether you should. Well, we're way beyond that. We're going to have to deal with all of this. And if our larger tech companies take the attitude that people should just figure out what's credible, I mean, just apply that to everything else. Guess what? We've got you can take a capsule that has 100 nanobots in it that's going to go fix your whatever, and you poop it out and you're cured. But there's side effects. I mean, unless you're told, if people just make that stuff and say, yeah, well, we don't really know what's going to happen, but it'll probably make you better. Where's life going to be if these companies that are giving us things, they're happy to take our money, but if they're not going to take responsibility for anything, how is our civilization going to endure? Civilization endures when people take responsibility for civilization, beginning at the personal level, and then at the local level, and then at the federal level. And if we're not going to be doing that, if no one's going to be taking responsibility anywhere, if every tech company is going to say, yeah, we're getting rich, where is that going to leave us? It's going to leave us in some sci-fi dystopia that we haven't even seen depicted or written about yet. It's going to be beyond our wildest notions. And it ain't going to be good. So when I read that Mark Zuckerberg, who I really admire what he did. Mark Zuckerberg has changed the world. When the history of humanity is written, Mark Zuckerberg is going to have at least a paragraph in the Encyclopedia Galactica that every hitchhiker is taking with them with their towel. And there's going to be people are going to stop and read about this guy going, wow, that was an interesting idea. And when he created Facebook, I'll bet he had no idea, even 15 years later, that he would say, people should decide what's credible. I don't even think Mark Zuckerberg believes that, which is, Anyway, don't know what you guys think. I know it's not my normal bill of fare, but to me, it's so dystopian. It's such a sci-fi dystopian idea that Mark Zuckerberg is saying people should decide what's credible, not tech companies. That's like some news report, you'd see at the beginning in a montage from some epic science fiction movie about the disintegration of mankind. There's a book I read, I believe it's by Greg Bear, and it's called Blood Music. And it's an incredible science fiction novel that has a really heady concept, and it's about blood. That's all I'm gonna tell you. And there was a time when the writer who wrote the movie The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. This was back when I was reading. I used to be a story analyst or script reader for a number of years in the 90s, where you would read, I would read, my job was to read screenplays, both for production companies, and I worked for both the William Morris Agency and the Creative Artists Agency as a freelance reader. And I also read lots of other scripts for things that I was interested in. And I had read Blood Music, the book, and I thought, wow, man, this is pretty wild. By the end, it's pretty wild. And the CAA, sure enough, there was the script, and I read it. I was like, man, I mean, I wonder what would happen if this really happened? I mean, it's a book about really what ends up all of humanity. It's basically a biological version of 2001, kind of. But I would it'd be like Willow Yang's favorite book. Willow, read Blood Music. I think you'd get a kick out of it. Of course, you'd probably write a review about everything that's wrong with Blood Music now, because the science, since the book has been written, has been disproven, but that's okay. It was written today. Somebody read The Diamond Age and Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson and thanked me for recommending them. So I recommend everybody go out and read Greg Bear's Blood Music. It's a really interesting, very heady science fiction novel, but they were going to make a movie once, and I was sorry that it didn't get made. It'd be hard to make, but in this day and age, maybe somebody will make it. Maybe somebody watching this right now will be like, ooh, let me go option Blood Music. There is a script, and it is by the guy who wrote The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea. It does exist, and I think, believe it or not, if memory serves, could be wrong about this, Bob Bookman was the agent of either the writer or maybe Greg Bear. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But yeah. So the question is, where are we going? Where are we going? I don't know. Now, I was on the Weekly Hero yesterday. A lot of people asked me, Rob, change of pace time. First of all, let me see if anybody has sent me in some chats. I hope I haven't lost anybody. I hope people are like, man, I'm trying not to get political, because I think human truths can't really be politicized, or they shouldn't be politicized, because that doesn't do any good for anybody if that's the case. Wow, there are a lot of people here. Wow, already. Okay, then, people. I like that. So, Savage McFilthy says, have you seen Ninja Scroll? I have not seen Ninja Scroll. I apologize. I know what it is, but I have not seen it, so I apologize. Paul Luis Caballero says, hey, Rob, hope you're well. If you have the time, I sent you a 2-page letter on Instagram. You know what? I hardly ever read stuff on Instagram, so I will go pick that up and I will read it. I would really appreciate it if you could read it. Thank you. Well, Paul, I will do that after this chat. I should look at Instagram. I just usually post pictures of action figures, Blu-rays, my dogs, or whatever. So I apologize. I've been remiss, but I will go check that out. Clinging Mars says, the first duty of every Starfleet officer is truth. That is correct. And I believe that's what Captain Picard said to Wesley, perhaps, in the Star Trek The Next Generation episode, The First Duty. The Richard is here. The Richard says, congrats, Rob. Apologies for not being here yesterday. I have brought my brother Brian here to send some aloha to you and everyone in this lovely chat. Well, the Richard, as everyone knows, yesterday was my 250th Robservations show, which to me is astonishing. Unbelievable. And we're going to get to show number 300 before Christmas. I mean, that's like teaching 4 years of college. Not that I'm necessarily worthy of being a college professor, but the Richard also says, it's like all the cool new things become weaponized. Deep fakes also, and especially so. Yeah, it's true. It's crazy. Again, Yuval Noah Harari. I always go back. He wrote the book Sapiens. I talk about that and its sequel, Homo Deus. If you have not read Sapiens, you should read Sapiens. Sapiens is about, it's the history of humanity over the last 100,000 years, basically. It is, as I've said before, if a book could be delicious, like when you read it, it actually tastes good when you're rolling it around instead of in your tongue, you're rolling it around in your mind. It's delicious. The book's delicious. At the end of Sapiens, Yuval Harari asks the question, what do we want as a species? What do we want? What are we going to do? Ever since I finished Sapiens and jumped into Homo Deus, I've been thinking about this. What do we want? What do you want? What do you want in your life personally? What do you want? What do we want? I mean, you can only answer that question. You you can ride the wave of what everybody else does for you, but eventually you're going to get to shore and you're going to be left there and the surf's going to be gone. And you're going to be asking yourself, well, what do I want and how am I going to get it? Well, no one's going to tell you but yourself. But Yuval Harari wants to know, what do we want as a species? We don't know. What do we want to be rich for? What? So we can live in a bigger house? Why? I don't know. I just want, you know what I really want in my life right now? I want to be able to make movies and I want a display case that's big enough for all my hot toys. That's pretty much what I want. A simple man. I would like to have, tens of millions of dollars to make movies, but that's to employ other people, not necessarily for me to spend on hot toys. Clinging Mars says, I don't trust tech companies to decide what is true. No, they're not going to, because big companies, by definition, they don't want you to know what's true because it would cut into their profits. And that's just capitalism. I understand. We don't have true capitalism. I've never understood. I've always believed that the beginning of a civilization is you want people smart and healthy. I mean, we should make that a national security issue. Let's make everybody smart and healthy. That way we have the best population we can to do great stuff. If people aren't smart and healthy, of course, there's no money in keeping people healthy. There's only money in keeping people sick. So you go into the doctor and pay for more. But you know what? In the long term, we got to start our thinking. Our thinking's got to change. But anyway, Sir Ivan Bennett says, hey, Rob, on a light note, have you read Matt Fraction's Jimmy Olsen? I have not. It's awesome and very much full of humor and whimsy. It's not X-Men, but it's fun. I like Matt Fraction a lot. X-Men, the first X-Men after House of X and Powers of 10 came out yesterday. I need to go to the comic book store and pick that up, but I didn't know there was a new Jimmy Olsen comic. I would love that. I would love that. Mark Chure is here. Mark says, Google is affecting searches, promoting particular political sites and channels while burying others in an effort to fix the election. Whistleblowers have already come forward. I know. I mean, look, even these channels, the reason it's important, the reason I always ask you, hey, if you like this channel, please hit like, is YouTube analytics matter. Like, I'd like to have a bigger audience, if for no other reason than, I want to make this channel bigger and have more voices. It's funny. You know who wrote to me yesterday? Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers. He saw me talking about him. Somebody must have sent him a clip or something. And he said, hey, man, when are we going to get together and chat? When are we going to talk? He wrote me. He said, I heard you want to interview me. That's cool. I mean, Jeremy, Geeks and Gamers, Fandom Menace. He reached out. He saw my thing. How cool is that? And I can sit down, and whether you like Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, whether you like the Fandom Menace, whatever, Jeremy reached out to me and said, hey, dude, let's chat. Well, there it is in a nutshell. That's what fans do. We chat to each other about our fandom. That's when it's great. And even if I have a feeling when Jeremy and I finally talk, it's going to be fun. I mean, I don't think who's going to get a word in edgewise when Jeremy and I are talking to each other. It's going to be delightful. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like, you're fraternizing with the enemy. I don't think they're the enemy. The Fandom Menace, we all want great stories well told. Anyway, I thought that was cool that Jeremy reached out to me. But how cool is it that we have that going on? But YouTube, Google, whatever, the way they run things, it's very interesting. And by the way, if you think this idea of the truth is a political idea, it's not. It is a science fiction idea, and it is a reality, and we're dealing with it now. Matouine says, wonder what happened to the Planet Eater weapon from the original series Doomsday Machine. Wouldn't it be irresponsible for the Federation to leave it adrift, or someone like the Klingons to reverse engineer? You know what? I came up with a story about that I was actually going to pitch to Next Generation, or actually I think it was Deep Space Nine. It was Deep Space Nine, I think. During the Dominion War, there is a super secret weapons lab in the Federation, and the Doomsday Machine it's in a giant planetoid. In my mind, it was like they used the Genesis device illegally they took the proto matter out of the Matrix, and they had this planetoid, and it was basically a hollowed out planetoid. And in the planetoid was where they did all kinds of weapons research. And in the planetoid, they had the Doomsday Machine. It was not was deactivated. They had it in there. They'd been studying the alien technology. And because of the Dominion War, there was a scientist there that was deciding whether or not he was going to turn it on and unleash it because he didn't like certain political things that were happening. That was the basis for my story. And then, and would he do it or not? And the first thing that it would do is, of course, destroy the weapons lab. And so, but that was my idea. And I've always wondered what happened to that. So it's funny that you asked me about that. But yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. But now they kind of know how to blow it up. You know, I always thought that, okay, well, they've already figured out how to neutralize the Doomsday Machine. And I do like the fact that if anybody's read the Star Trek novel Vendetta by Peter David, he posits that the Doomsday Machine was actually built to fight the Borg, which I thought was pretty cool. I like that idea. I thought that was really neat. I've got so many letters from people. I mean, it's I'm just going to dive right in. I don't even know. I haven't even looked at these letters. I've not looked at these letters at all, but people have, except I did see that Willow sent me one. Here is a new letter from Matthew Horn. Matthew Horn says, "Hi, Mr. Burnett, subscriber here. I tuned into your show yesterday on 10/16. I caught the part where you were reading a letter about African Americans in a World War II film and the historical inaccuracy based upon our segregationist past. Perhaps the movie you were discussing was not about race. Perhaps it simply had African Americans portrayed historical characters of different ethnic heritages. If we cannot see past color of people portraying white people, then we still have a major road to travel." Huh. Well, Matthew, here's the thing. I think that I think the idea in the letter was that if you're telling a World War II story, there are certain ways, and I would say there are certain ways that you must adhere to verisimilitude. Now, your point is well taken. Like we talk about the fact that you're bringing up the idea that why couldn't a black actor play a white person? Well, and I always think back to Shawshank Redemption. The character of Red that's played by Morgan Freeman was in the book white. And I have no problem with that at all. You know, I bet who could ever imagine the Shawshank Redemption without Morgan Freeman playing the role of Red? You can't. So I have no problem. I have no problem with that at all. I have no problem with a black actor playing a white character, changing the ethnicity of somebody in the story, because there's nothing necessarily intrinsic to that character or the story that a person needs to be black. And does that have to be an issue? No. But here's the thing. In World War II, I do think that there is this idea of, again, it comes back to what is the truth. Sure, you can have any actor of any ethnicity play a character. Why couldn't there be a black actor in that movie? Well, okay, you could be. I don't care. However, when someone's watching the film and goes to themselves, you know what? There were no black members of this particular regiment. Then you're starting to blur the lines. That's when the idea of truth. Now I understand. Does it really matter because you've got zombies and experiments? And probably not. Probably not. But that's where the slippery slope of truth begins to unravel. And I think it's a really interesting question. Does it really matter? Maybe not. But if you do know something about World War II, again, I go back to Crimson Tide. I love Crimson Tide. I love Tony Scott's Crimson Tide. But I've heard from friends of mine who are submariners what absolute hogwash that movie really is in terms of protocol and things that happen. So the people that know real submariners are looking at that and they want to throw their drinks at the screen. And I understand that too. Now, I don't know anything about it. So I just assume, well, that's how submarines work, even though that's not the case. Now, the real question is, does it matter? And I think that's a really important question. Does it matter? Does it matter? And I think we have to ask ourselves at some point whether or not it matters. And I think it's easy to say, nah, it doesn't matter. But one day it's going to matter. It's going to matter to somebody somewhere. The issue, somebody once said, I made a joke about my favorite pronouns or things like me and mine. You want to use my pronouns, me and mine, and others. And I was just making a joke about pronouns because language. What I find really interesting is I think that I don't care what you want to be called. Just tell me what you want to be called. How do you want to be addressed? How do you want me to know you? How do you want to be known by the rest of the world? What can I do to facilitate you being acknowledged the way you want to be? I have no problem with that at all. And I think everybody should be called what they want to be called. Whatever their name is, whatever the pronouns they prefer, that's fine. Just tell me. Just tell me. But I do think this idea of the subjugation of language can be problematic because we need to know what language means in order to communicate with one another. And there's a great episode, well, I don't know how great it is, but it's an episode of the mid-'80s Twilight Zone that I really, really liked. And it was the very first episode of the show. There was 2 episodes, but it was the first episode of the show. And I want to say it's based on a Harlan Ellison story. And it's called Shatter Day. And in the story, a guy wakes up and all language has changed. Words don't mean what they used to mean. And it gets worse. It gets worse and worse. And he can't communicate. And then at the end, he basically starts reading children's books to figure out how to talk to people because he has no way of communicating. And I see in a way this idea that we're going to subvert language. I think the need and the ability for people to be clear about how they communicate is very, very important. And I don't like the idea that our methods of communication are being subverted. I want to make this the way I want it to be. That everybody should just have what they want, whenever they want, however they want it. Well, eventually you're going to lose the cohesion that you need. The fabric of our society will be less cohesive if we can't talk to one another. And I think that's can be problematic. So, but that said, again, I don't mind if somebody wants me to call them anything specific. I do think, though, in the larger from a larger perspective, we need to understand what people are saying to each other so we get what people mean in our quest to get to the truth. But anyway, I think that's a really interesting, Matthew. I think that's a really interesting idea. Can we ever live in a world where, like, would you want a white dude playing, I don't know, Dizzy Gillespie, or maybe that's a bad example, but you know what I mean? It would just be. I think that they're. I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm going to ponder that for a while. Interesting. This one comes from Adam Blue. Another letter from Adam Blue. Adam says, "Hey, Rob, I'm just as curious as everyone else about the future of Deadpool. I personally don't care if Deadpool's in the MCU or not, but it would be a waste not to continue and utilize Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. I even think that a Ryan Reynolds Deadpool movie can work with less of the crude humor and vulgarity. I think the dialogue-based humor can be toned down without losing the essence of the character, but I think some of the zany visual representations of the humor need to be there. There's talk of Disney being a family brand, but what is that other than a label? Fox churned out Star Wars and Alien within a short time span. They are not related based on IP, but they both took science fiction into a realm of verisimilitude that hadn't been done since 2001. I could be wrong on that since I was born in 1983, but this is the impression I get. You are correct, sir. At a young age, I watched all types of adult content, Michael Jackson's Thriller, the Jason and Freddie movies, etc., etc. There was some serious and scary stuff. But is the concern today more about society's reactions during this socially aware period in evaluating art? I'm not convinced Disney needs to stay family friendly and avoid adult themes. It could just be the answer to give us as things are figured out. But considering what happened to James Gunn, even though he's back, I'm almost convinced Disney is doubling down on the family friendly because they think it's the safest way to get everyone's dollars. This really brings me to Blade. I'm not heavily invested in the MCU or Deadpool, but Blade I have a personal stake in. When I saw the first Blade in theaters with my dad, it changed me. Everything about the first Blade film was revolutionary at the time. What makes Blade unique is the dedication Wesley Snipes put into the character. He made Blade larger than the films themselves with his acting, but he also incorporated his additional skill of martial arts. Now that Disney announced making a Blade film, I wonder what exactly the point would be. The only valid point to me would be to have a character of Blade in a family-friendly setting for a larger audience of African descent to be able to enjoy and feel more a part of pop culture, as Black Panther did. And I think, like Black Panther, the story would reflect that. But if that's not the angle and Blade still plans to be family friendly, there's little to work with since Mahershala Ali is not a martial artist. To me, the dynamic of Snipes acting and martial arts made Blade top tier action character, which is why we see him in Expendables. The mythology of vampires then allowed the action to be visceral, similar to John Wick and Deadpool. Ali is a fantastic actor and already has the ability to channel the Snipes version of Blade. But are we going to see amazing action scenes other than CGI craziness? Are we going to get something other than tinge of horror from vampires and the inherent focus on blood? I think from a filmmaking perspective, Warner Brothers would probably produce a Blade movie more in line with the mythology, but Blade is a Marvel property, and Marvel now falls under Disney, a supposed family brand. Disney can be successful without being family friendly, but family friendly means wider audiences and more money. And as much as we want to trust Disney with these properties, being family friendly is helpful only to make more money. Our society is on the crest of a wave right now, making sure everyone is nice and no one is mean. We can get over this by focusing on the craft and not making sure it's appealing enough to the widest audience in order to make as much money as possible. Once Disney puts out a well-done R-rated film, I will have more trust in them. Lastly, wouldn't it be cool if Disney chose one film a year to donate earnings to a cause, like getting food and water to children in a third world country? Where does all this money go, other than the obvious? Let me know what you think, Rob, and thanks for reading. Adam Blue, what a great letter. It's interesting. I read these things and it's funny. I'm talking extemporaneously off the top of my head, but I find it interesting that horror in general, there's been this PGification of horror, and the female audience over the last 25 years has embraced horror, and it is no longer, horror films are not a genre that boys are taking girls to get them scared to make out with them in the movie theaters. It's not like that at all. Horror is as much a female interest as it is a male interest, and if not more, because the idea of blood and childbearing and all of those things, I mean, it's inherently got certain qualities that can be exploited and used. Look, anytime there's blood involved in anything, you've got a tinge of horror in it. Blood is our lifeblood. I mean, you spill blood, somebody's life is ebbing away somehow in some way, shape, or form. But I think that, and vampires, of course, vampire mythology is about the seduction so vampires can live forever, drinking the life force of someone else. And I think it's really interesting, like Doctor Strange and the multiverse of madness. Like, how far are you going to go? I don't know how you make a PG Blade movie. I really don't. I think you're going to have to deal with issues that are going to be uncomfortable. Same with like Deadpool. I mean, yeah, you could tone Deadpool down, but Deadpool has already been established like a certain character. I think it's really interesting. What I don't understand is why the obvious. Why didn't Disney just state right away, like, we are buying 20th Century Fox to release R-rated material? Period. That was their out. Whether it's Alien, whether it's Die Hard, whether it's Predator, whatever, whether it's Deadpool, they bought a studio. We are releasing an R-rated film under 20th Century Fox. Yes, Disney is the parent company, and there are going to be parents. Sometimes someone is one day they're going to transgress and everything's going to go to hell, and people are going to be like, you're making these kinds of movies. Well, yeah, I mean, they bought them. But look, I'm a gore hound. I love erotic thrillers. I love all kinds of really questionable story material. The more extreme, the better. But on the other hand, I don't think boom, chicka, boom, boom, sex scene in the middle of an Avengers movie is going to do anything to anybody. I don't think it would serve its purpose. Now, if you have a succubus in a Blade movie that's going to seduce, whether it's Blade or whether it's somebody else, I'm all for that. Of course, now you can't show a woman's breasts on screen. It's exploitative. Yeah, well, it is. that woman who's exploiting the man's desire to touch those breasts so she can steal his soul or whatever. She's working with what she's got. I mean, that's biology. That's scientific and physical truth right there. But yeah, interesting. I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know where that's going to go. I'm really curious to see how Disney is going to address these things. I don't know if they know, to be honest. I really don't know. Let's see. Samuel Phoenix says, play any video. Elizabeth was shopping. She just got home. Samuel Phoenix says, play any video games. What's your favorite? Well, I am wearing my douche gold t-shirt. And for those Grand Theft Auto fans, everyone knows that douche gold is a in-game hooch, in-game booze. I do love my Grand Theft Auto. My favorite video game of all time, I will tell you. You want to know my favorite video game of all time? Activision's late 90s update of Battlezone. I was obsessed with it. It's both an RPG and a real-time strategy game. It's a first-person shooter, and and a real-time strategy game. The Richard says, Ninja Scroll is possibly the greatest action anime I've ever seen. It took friends a while to get me to watch it. I think you have a couple of friends here now who want you to check it out. Well, the Richard, I will do that indeed. High praise. And, I like anime. Every time I watch something new, I dig it. Samuel Phoenix says, what do you think about alien visitation? Look, like Fox Mulder, I want to believe. We don't have necessarily any physical evidence yet, unless, of course, you watch Joe Rogan, and there's a lot of people that will say there are gravity engines that we've been studying since the 80s. I'd like to believe that's true. I wish there were alien intelligences that have been visiting us, and that we, and I don't rule it out, but I don't think that there's any yet compelling evidence that says, yes, the aliens are here. But I want to believe. And if there are aliens that want to stick a probe up my wazoo, I'm like, bring it on. I want to go. I want to see your shit, man. I'll probably want a 6-scale figure of you too, and build that model later. But it bums me out. I wish we could know. If you're a fan of the V miniseries, and let's face it, who isn't? You can now get it on Blu-ray from Warner Archive. If the V aliens came, I wouldn't necessarily be a turncoat, but I would definitely be a collaborator, perhaps. Although I would sneak information off the ship that they wanted to steal our water and eat us. But anyway. Willow Yang says, I just read the description for Blood Music on Amazon. Why are scientists always portrayed as hubristic maniacs who make terrible decisions? Because they are. Everyone knows that. Well, I think because, it's an easy target. It's a shortcut to a characterization. But interesting. You should read Blood Music. It's good. I like Blood Music. Samuel Phoenix also says, I asked John yesterday, and now I want your thoughts. Do you think Childs is infected or not at the end of The Thing? On my part, I'd say he was. You know what? That's a very interesting question, and I've pondered it since I saw that movie in 1982. What Samuel is asking about, spoiler alert, is about John Carpenter's 1982 masterpiece, The Thing. Now, if you haven't seen John Carpenter's The Thing, you got to watch John Carpenter's The Thing. And before anybody bitches and moans and complains, there are no women in The Thing. It's just about a bunch of dudes up in or down in the Arctic. And you got to watch it. If you haven't seen The Thing, everybody's seen The Thing, right? Incredible Rob Bottin physical effects. It's just a great movie. But the question is, at the end of the film, I'd like to believe that both Childs and McReady are human. I've always believed they're both human, and we're supposed to be left pondering that question, as they are at the end of the movie. But I believe that they're human beings. That's how I've chosen to believe it. But the problem is that whole base is covered with particles that can become the Thing. So if anybody ever finds them, the world's in trouble. There was a sequel comic. I think Dark Horse published it. I think. Amir B says, hi, Rob. Have you seen South Park this season? I have not. Their social commentary has always been on point with China and plant-based last night. I read about it. It sounds hilarious. Love Trey and Matt. They haven't lost their touch after all of these years. I can't believe. I'll tell you a funny story. There is a lost episode of South Park that I got to see. I once made a birthday greeting video, a birthday video for George Clooney. And Matt and Trey did a special animation of them, the South Park kids, talking about George Clooney, and it opened this video. And the video's never been seen by anybody else except George Clooney at his birthday party, because I used to be very good friends with his assistant, Amy Cohen, and we made this video, and it's incredibly star-studded. I mean, it even has a topless Cameron Diaz, and it was an amazing video. It was shown once, but they did a special animation when the South Park kids talk about George Clooney and his predilection for pigs. And I've loved them for 20 years. So good on them. Magic K says, people took Robert Pattinson's recent comments on Batman is not a hero too far. They're not like, how dare you say Batman is hero? How dare you say Batman is not a hero? You know what? I mean, everybody, it's like, whoa, slow your roll, easy cheetah. If you want to believe that Batman isn't a hero, that's fine, because you could look at him, depending on your political affiliation, you could see Batman as a lawless vigilante that's working beyond the law, where there's no due process when the Dark Knight is involved. And that might be true. That might be true. And you could make that argument. Now, any sane, rational, intelligent person would understand what Robert Pattinson's saying. Like, okay, I can see that take. But no, people are going to get offended. Like, what do you mean Batman isn't a hero? Of course he's a hero. Or he's a lawless vigilante that is subverting our justice system. I mean, you can look at it however you want. Does it matter? If you think Batman's a hero, then Batman's a hero. Batman's not real. Batman can be whatever you want him to be. So I think that's kind of a funny thing to say. Rick Berg is here. Rick Berg sent me in a support of the channel. Super chat. Thanks, Rick. Appreciate it. Anthony Gonzalez says, what did you think of DC's Identity Crisis? Dude, I loved Identity Crisis. Now, I know a lot of people, for those of you who don't know what Identity Crisis is, let's just say it's a murder mystery story about something that happens to a character. Elongated man's involved, his wife's involved. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's one of my favorite DC Universe stories that has a lot of questionable ethics and morality, beginning, of course, with Batman. Ask yourself, if you read Identity Crisis, is Batman a hero in that story? Or is he a monumental douchebag that you cannot trust anymore? I don't know. But I loved Identity Crisis. You know, in this day and age, I wonder, I have not read anything recently about Identity Crisis, but you can understand it. It's a one-shot base. Well, I mean, it's collected. You should read it. If you are interested in the DC Pantheon of Heroes, the Justice League, it has some first of all, the story is a little, I'm not going to lie, it's a little icky. Actually, it's a lot icky. And it has some really questionable morality happening in it, but I loved it. I really loved it. Again, it's a different take on your superheroes, and I really dug Identity Crisis. Certainly not for everyone. Ian Samuels sent in a letter today. Ian Samuels says, and I love this, just in time for Halloween, Ian Samuels says, the most frightening film of all time. Here in the United Kingdom in the early 80s, we lived through the period of ignominy known as the video nasties. No relation to the great record by the same title by The Damned. For those of you who don't know, there was a huge debate in the UK in the early 80s about extreme horror movies, slasher movies, movies like The Evil Dead. A lot of them were banned or taken off video store shelves or edited, and it was called the Video Nasties debate. They called these things Video Nasties. A group led by a woman called Mary Whitehouse decided that they should be the ones to be moral judges over films that we may watch. Eventually, they pressured both the British government and the BBFC, the British Board of Film Certification, that led to legislation creating the list of banned films, which became known as the Video Nasties. These films were selected because of the level of gore and violence. But other films suffer the ignominy of the BBFC declaration of uncertified and therefore are illegal to rent or buy. One film that the certifiers at the BBFC insisted was not being banned because it was a bad film, but in fact was a great film, but it was too good because of its subject. it was decided that it was too frightening. The only film to ever have that label assigned to it by the BBFC. That great film that was too frightening, that led to a ban not long after its VHS release in the UK, was The Exorcist. The Exorcist is indeed a great film and one of the best films of all time. It could even be argued that it is the best horror film of all time, perhaps. Does The Exorcist, being the most frightening film of all time, make it the best horror film? As a lover of horror, especially Hammer, I can't think of many films that can compete for that title. Can you? Well, Ian, you and I certainly, that is definitely, this letter is definitely one that says that Ian Samuels and I park our shuttlecrafts in the same shuttle bay. I love The Exorcist, and I do think it is the 2001 of horror films, the way 2001 is considered the greatest science fiction film ever made. I absolutely believe that The Exorcist is the best horror film ever made. Now, here's the thing. You need to be reasonably intelligent and have an attention span to find The Exorcist to be effective. There really aren't jump scares in The Exorcist, but it is supremely unsettling from a moral, ethical, logical standpoint. And it's truly, I think, it shakes you to your core core. And ultimately, yeah, you can overtly get off on the visual effects and the profanity and the 12-year-old girl slamming a crucifix between her legs, screaming, "Let our Lord and Savior have intercourse with you." It's horrifying and profane, and it's deeply disturbing on many levels. But the reason that I love The Exorcist so much is it's really about something. Now, I was raised a Jew, so Catholicism, Christianity of any kind is not lost on me, but I'm certainly not a believer. And yet, the reason I love The Exorcist so much is because it is about a man, Father Damien Karras, of great faith. He's a Catholic priest that, because of his mother and things that are happening in his life, has lost his faith. He basically has renounced God. And over the course of the film, despite all the horror histrionics that happen, what happens in that film in confronting the evil, and it is an evil, it is real. The movie states unequivocally, yes, this is an evil that has corrupted this innocent soul. And he finds his faith in combating this great evil. And in finding his faith in God again, he is able to defeat this evil and save the soul of an innocent. And to me, not only is that, I mean, one of the great horror stories of all time, it's just one of the great movie stories of all time. And I think The Exorcist is a masterpiece, and that will never change. So yeah, I agree with you, man. And I'll tell you why. I mean, there's a lot of religious people that live in the UK, and that film is profoundly disturbing. When it came out in the early 70s, when it first came out, people were fainting, they were throwing up in the theater. Their faith was shaken because it is a movie about God himself being challenged by the devil. Now I hear that and I'm like, bring it on. Yeah. But it's also a movie where God wins. And, you can say at the end of the day, you can say it's the most horrific thing ever, but I see The Exorcist as it's a big win for the big man upstairs. God emerges victorious. And so does the audience, because The Exorcist rules. Thanks for writing in, Ian. Richard Ford is here. Richard Ford says, "Dear Rob, today I learned that Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space, passed away earlier this month, and he was an imagination connoisseur. Following his career as a cosmonaut with the Soviet space program, he went on to be an artist and a painter with a number of space-themed works. YouTuber Anton Petrov collected some of them into a video tribute. Well worth a 5 to 10 minute watch for this pioneer of our exoplanetary journey as a species. How amazing that he got to contribute to the real and imagine a fictional version of a better future. We should all take a minute for this pioneer." And there is a link. You know what I can do with Richard Ford's link? Because I have the power. Here you go. I can put it in the live chat. How about that? You got to love that. There you go. This is a link to the piece on Alexei Leonov. I just put it in the live chat. I hope you enjoy it. You know, Alexei Leonov has always been a fascinating figure to me, more so than Yuri Gagarin, who, let's face it, they've tarnished his reputation, but not Alexei Leonov. And I agree. And you know, it's very funny. I am a 2010 fan. It bums me out that the movie is not nearly as good as Arthur C. Clarke's novel. If you're a 2001 fan, you owe it to yourself to read 2010 Odyssey 2. I love that book. The movie, interestingly enough, in Peter Hyams' desire, the writer-director of Peter Hyams' desire to make it more topical, added this Cold War element that really dates the film. And I love the film. It came out Christmas of 1984. I actually reviewed it for my high school newspaper. I even drew the little masthead. I love 2010 as a space adventure. But what's really interesting is if you read the book, in the book, the Russians and the Americans, rather than eventually being at odds with one another, have teamed up to beat the Chinese to the Jovian system. And I always thought that was cool. And it's too bad that Peter Hyams didn't go that route. And look, Keir Dullea is still alive. I think somebody should remake 2010 today. And what's cool about 2010 is, of course, the Russian spaceship is named the Leonov after Alexei Leonov. So thanks for that. I hope everybody checks out that link. Again, I just put it in the live chat. I think it's cool. Jeffrey Mao, one of our most prolific letter writers here at the Post-Geek Singularity. Jeffrey Mao sends another letter in. Greetings, Mr. Robot. Jeffrey Mao must be following me on Twitter. My Halloween Twitter is Robot Monster Burnett. If you haven't seen Robot Monster, it's literally a monster movie made in the 50s where it was so low budget they took an ape suit and an astronaut helmet, put them together, and there you have a robot monster. Greetings, Mr. Robot. Given your documented difficulties with pronouncing names, I felt one long overdue correction was in order. Every time you pronounce my compatriot Ang Lee's name is Ong, it makes my gums bleed. The most common pronunciation for Westerners to simply pronounce his name as it is written, like hang without the H, Ang Lee. However, if you want to be adventurous, and any imagination connoisseur is nothing if not adventurous, then try pronouncing Ang like the first syllable in Anakin. Ang Lee. But stop before your tongue hits your teeth. It might help to put your fingers in your mouth while you do this. Of course, don't do this on air or you will look funny. In others, don't pronounce the an, even if it kind of sounds like it would be. The sound is also familiar to the ein sound in French, so you can ask the lovely Elizabeth for help with that. Hope that helps, and happy pronouncing. Your linguistic pal, Jeff. I can put my fingers in my mouth. I don't know. It's too tough for me. I got to try that again. So I won't say Ang Lee. Ang Lee. I'll say, how about Ang? Can I just say Ang Lee, Jeff? Can I just do that? All right. I can't do French. I gotta learn. What can I say? Let's see. Dean Mikitich, another letter writer who's always here at the Post-Geek Singularity. And I love when Dean writes in. I think I finally can get his name right. Hi, Rob, and the Post-Geek Singularity. Just a quick follow-up to my last letter. I'd like to thank you for reading out my letter and Ian Samuels in the chat for giving me the film's name. The film I was looking for is called Malcolm. Dean Mikitich was looking for this movie where a car splits in half. And apparently, here we go. Malcolm is a 1986 Australian comedy written by the husband and wife team of David Parker and Nadia Tess. Directed by Nadia Tess, who made her debut as a feature film director on this film. The film stars Colin Friels as Malcolm. After reading the film's wiki page and watching the trailers on YouTube, I got some of the details wrong, but then it's been nearly 30 years since I saw this film, so that's to be expected, but it all came flooding back, laugh out loud. I've checked Amazon to see how much a copy would cost, and it ain't cheap. £23.98 for a used copy or £50 for a brand new copy, both from third parties. I guess that due to the DVD no longer being in production. This film is not available on Netflix or Amazon Prime here in the UK, but it might be in the States. And if you have not seen it, I recommend that you do. I think it will park nicely into your shuttle bay. Kind regards, Dean Mikitich. Well, Dean, that goes on the list, everyone. Malcolm, See, what I'm proud of you, imagination connoisseurs. In a day, somebody comes here looking for something, and you guys run to that person's aid and find out. I guess Ian Samuels immediately in the chat knew what we were talking about and helped a brother out or a sister. Any of you imagination connoisseurs, how great is that? Electric Barbarella 27 says Blade isn't African American, he's British, lest we forget that. That's true. I guess you're right there. By the way, I love the name Electric Barbarella. That is a Duran Duran reference, everyone. Of course, the band Duran Duran's name is a reference to Dr. Duran in the movie Blade Runner of Barbarella that stars Jane Fonda, based on the comic produced by Dino De Laurentiis. Also, Jean-Philippe Law, who played Diabolique, is in that movie playing Pygar. I know I'm off in the weeds now. Nick Markin says, hey, Rob, can you talk about the Donner cut of Superman 2? What are your thoughts on it, and do you like the theatrical cut better? Nick, that is a good question. So for those of you who, if you've been living under a rock, Superman the movie and Superman 2 were filmed at the same time. And what happened was Richard Donner was replaced midstream by Richard Lester. Richard Lester is a British director who had directed Help, and he directed The Three and the Four Musketeers. And he brought a lot of humor into the proceedings. And the version of Superman 2 that was released theatrically in this country in June of 1981, I know somebody from Australia is going to go, dude, Superman 2 came out in Australia in 1980. That is true, but it did not open in the States until June of 1981. But anyway, so Richard Lester directed the theatrically released version of Superman 2, and there's significant changes. Susanna York as Laura, Superman's mom, was in the movie instead of Marlon Brando. And there's just a lot of little things and some bigger things that were changed. Richard Donner's version was a little bit more somber. The three outlaws from Krypton who descended to Earth to confront the Man of Steel in the cosmic battle for world supremacy, which is the ad line on my one sheet that was on my wall for years, were a little bit more serious. The movie was a little more serious in tone than Richard Lester's version. One of the things, and you can get the Donner cut on home video and physical media, and there has been a debate. The problem is the Richard Donner version of Superman 2 is not complete. It's as complete as they could make it, and I think it's a good indicator of what could have been. But I prefer, even as much as I like what's in the Donner cut, I prefer the theatrically released Richard Lester version, warts and all. One of the things that anybody who's seen Superman 2 100 million times, the way I have, one of the things you will absolutely miss in the Richard Donner version is Superman does not, when he comes back to Metropolis to fight Zod, Ursa, and Non, the scene where he says, "General, would you care to step outside?" is not in the movie. So I have to say, and the Donner version, when I first saw, I actually saw it with Richard Donner at the Directors Guild. I think it was the first time that was ever screened. And I mean, I liked it, but again, it is an unrealized vision. It's part of the way there. It's not all the way there, but ultimately, and look, it's familiarity as well. I've lived with the Richard Lester version since 1981. I saw it. There was a movie theater in Linwood, Washington, that's north of Seattle, called the Grand Cinemas Alderwood. And it was at their opening celebration that I saw Superman 2. Also, later, I worked at a video store that was in that movie theater. My friend Craig Hyland and I opened that video store, SRO Video, and it was the very first video store in a movie theater, I believe, in the world. And Craig Hyland and I spent 6 months curating the greatest collection of films at the time in any video store. At least we'd like to think we did. John Hartle of the Seattle Times wrote about how we did. So kudos to us. But anyway, yeah, I prefer the Richard Lester version. Mark C says, Rob, Arctic is north, Antarctic is south. Plus, you missed my second super chat. I did. Well, that's why I said it was. They were in the Antarctic. That's why I said down below. I said first south and I said north. Did I miss a super chat that you said? Mark C also says politicians have been lying to get elected since the birth of the nation. People have always had to decide what's credible. Nobody blasted the platform before. I'll take Facebook policy over Google. Well, I mean, that's true. That's true, but we didn't have, before people would read a newspaper in their town. I mean, now you've got these tech companies have a global reach to them. So, but Mark, I tend to agree with you, but what's the difference between Facebook and Google? I mean, Google is bigger ultimately, but Google is YouTube. I don't know. I'm just waiting to somebody makes the Star Trek virtual world and I can go live in it for the rest of my life. They can hook my body up to some kind of feeder and I'll just be hanging on a wall somewhere. Or better yet, just take my brain out and keep it alive forever. And I'll live in a virtual world, or put it on a generational starship and send my brain to control whatever generational starship they build to go to Alpha Centauri. And if it takes 150 years to get there, great. I'll live for 150 years as only a brain and I'll run the ship. How about that? Rizzle says 2 of 3 Academy critics said they refused to see the Joker. John Campea said it's not a big deal, and 5 or 6 critics not seeing it is nothing. 2 of 30 is nearly 7%. 7% of 7,000 voters is nearly 500 voters. Not a huge. That's a huge deal. Well, Rizzle, you're right. I don't believe, however, look, I think the great secret of anybody who's supposed to watch movies, I wonder how many people are going to get around to watching all Academy members watch everything in every nominated category. I mean, I know not all the Academy members vote in all the categories, but I would be willing to bet you that many Academy voters over the years have missed 1 or 2 of the, or if not more, of the Best Picture nominees. Maybe not, but maybe they do. But I think it could be a huge deal. Who knows? I mean, look, I think will, in fact, Joker get nominated for Best Picture? Probably. Is it going to win? Doubtful. I'm putting all my money. If I was going to go all in, I'm going in on Scorsese's The Irishman. But who knows? I could be wrong. I don't know. Let's see. Franz Morehart is here. Franz M. I got all the regulars writing these great letters. Franz M says, reading uneducated opinions from a range of professionals whose main talent is critiquing others' talent. I was dismayed to learn Penzi de Group has decided that Revival is a shaggy dog time-wasting tale with an admittedly nightmarish ending, which boils down to the same pretentious pricks who pissed all over the king for apparently penning pandering pulp pouting because he didn't deliver what they perceived as more pandering pulp. Okay, this is hilarious. Franz is on a Stephen King clip here. He wrote about the Institute yesterday. Now he's writing. People didn't like Revival. I like Revival. I don't apologize. They wanted a simple horror tale to give you nightmares. They wanted an old-fashioned Lovecraftian campfire story about secret electricity, the revival of Mary Fay, and a giant slave driving ants living beyond the world of the living. They wanted Null, the Great Ones, and Mother, who reserves indescribable torment for the fools who dare say no. And they were disappointed when that wasn't all they got because they completely failed to grasp what the story was about. Revival is a deep, affecting novel about growing up, sex, drugs, and rock music, and the nostalgia of getting older and getting old in America from the point of view of our grandparents. It's about life and losing faith to the darkness of life, even while struggling with the fear of what comes after. These themes, written so expertly, leisurely, and engrossingly by someone with a mastery of words sufficient enough to implant the vivid imagery of his personal real experiences through the medium of fiction. They are why you will read Revival cover to cover in one sitting. I almost did, by the way. And close it feeling not just scared, but lost, destroyed, and utterly exhausted, knowing something happened. Hot take. Stephen King's best short story ever is The Last Rung on the Ladder. I cry every time I read it. Shout out to my friend James Cole on Facebook, who actually made a film version of The Last Rung on the Ladder when he was a young man. It was a dollar baby. a movie that you pay Stephen King $1 so you can adapt one of his stories as long as you don't profit from it. And he did. It reminds me to remember the important things in my life. My own sister, who in some ways will always be that impossibly beautiful little girl who never failed to come to tell me whatever was on her mind. She never expected me to have any answers, but I always did my best to listen. And knowing that I was the one she chose to have to listen said more than 3 words. That I was the one she chose to have listen said more than 3 words ever could. Meaning, I love you. One of my biggest, let me read this again. She never expected me to have any answers, but I always did my best to listen. And knowing that I was the only one she chose to have listen said more than the 3 words ever could. I love you. One of my biggest regrets is not appreciating her enough, not fully grasping how wonderful it was to see her every day. I tried my best to make sure she knew I loved her, even when we were fighting. We used to spend so long arguing over silly things like what movie we should be watching that by the time we were done, we could have watched 2 movies. The democracy between us seemed terribly important. My mother would sometimes ask, "Why don't you just put in a movie?" She didn't get it, but somehow I think she did. She knew more than I knew. It didn't matter. Not really. One of my biggest regrets, if I'm being honest, I could have been nicer. I'm incredibly grateful that neither of us have succeeded in dying just yet. Not for lack of trying, laugh out loud. And my family is still intact, so that I can tell you how much I regret taking them for granted. I love you, Heidi. This is amazing, Franz. I mean, you start writing about Stephen King novels, and you go into this heartfelt story about how much you love your sister. This is why I love doing this show, and I love talking to you members of the Post-Geek Singularity community. I never know what these letters are going to say. That was very touching, and I want to thank you for writing that. This next letter comes from Sweden. All the way from Sweden, Stubble McShave is here. Stubble says, "Hey, Rob, the other day I thought about tropes, archetypes, and cliches. What's the difference, and how do you use your tropes so they don't turn into cliches? First, let's just talk about the word cliche. Sometimes I find the origins and meaning of certain words fascinating, and such is the case with the word cliche. Just so that everyone is on the same page, cliche is an expression, idea, or element of an artistic work which has become overused so much that it may have lost its original meaning or effect. It may even become irritating. It usually had a meaningful or novel origin, but now we mostly think it's boring and that it shows a lack of imagination by the creator. The word cliche has its roots in the early days of printing. They made a mold from paper mache or plaster with the intended text to be printed. With the mold, they cast a metal plate with the letters. It was called a stereotype and could be used to print the same exact text over and over again. The word cliché comes from French, where it was used as jargon for the stereotyping because of the sound it made when printing. So there, the words stereotype and cliché are connected and originated in the early days of printing. I did not know that. Anyway, back to the topic at hand on tropes, archetypes, and cliches. Some people think that tropes and archetypes are bad things. To me, that's not the case. I look upon tropes and archetypes as old, trusted ingredients that should be used in a new way to create a new dish, or in the case of storytelling, a great new story. Someone said, I can't remember who, that a good story is like a wonderful plate of fresh greens. When the greens are from a tin can, they're not as good. When we have a cliche in a story, we can taste the can. So what's the difference between a trope, an archetype, and a cliche? Archetypes have their background in Jungian texts, where they are innate universal prototypes for ideas and concepts. They have, in some ways, been adapted for storytelling. Examples of story archetypes would be the hero, the mentor, the everyman, the innocent, and the villain. Tropes are similar to archetypes. Examples would be the prostitute with a heart of gold, the mysterious stranger, the wise mentor, the cowboy, the funny sidekick, and the reluctant hero. Tropes and archetypes turn into cliches when you overuse them and don't have a fresh take on the concept. There can also be phrases that have become cliches, such as, "I'm too old for this shit." It was funny and original when Danny Glover said it in Lethal Weapon, but him repeating it in the subsequent movies, as well as society embracing it and using the phrase a lot, have made it into a cliche. And if it's used in a movie today, we would probably roll our eyes and groan. If you take the concept of the wise mentor, it's very close that the wise old man with a beard is about to become a cliche unless it's used in a fresh new way. It's been a trope for a long time. Gandalf and Dumbledore are examples of this trope, and I think that if we got another franchise where the mentor is a wise old man with a beard, we would see it as a cliche. In The Empire Strikes Back, Yoda fulfills the old archetype of a wise mentor. They are, however, doing new stuff with the archetype. Instead of having a tall old man with a beard, they have a wise old Muppet-like alien who talks funny, and that gave it a new take on the archetype that made it interesting and fresh. Now, however, Yoda has penetrated the popular culture to such a degree that if they made something similar, it would probably be seen as a cliche today. Anyway, that was my thoughts on archetypes, tropes, and cliches. Thanks, Stubble. P.S. You should check out, he sends a link. I love this. I can copy and paste links into the live chat. However, remember to set a timer because it's easy to get lost in there. All right, I'm going to put into the live chat right now Stubble's, let's see. I hope, although it's showing that, I guess I can't connect to the live chat. I don't know. I don't know why. I'm not connecting to the live chat. I hope people are still watching. I would assume so. Let's see. Yes, let's hope so. Yes, have some. Travis Rayner is here. Travis Rayner says Deep Space Nine is my favorite Trek series because of the relationship between Captain Sisko and his father, played by the great Brock Peters. Travis, I totally agree with you. I love Deep Space Nine. I've loved Deep Space Nine. You know, it's interesting. It's a hard show. It's funny when someone's never watched. I'll be very curious when Willow Yang gets to watch Deep Space Nine, because again, I think the pilot Emissary is the best of the modern Trek pilots. It's my favorite pilot. I think it's a great science fiction story. It's a great Star Trek story. I love the whole how they set up the milieu. But the first season of Deep Space Nine it never quite gets there until the last two episodes. Duet and In the Hands of the Prophets are, I think, amazing. Duet, especially, one of the great bottle episodes of Star Trek. I mean, there's a great, basically, but there's also other stories. There's the Brian Keith story where Kira goes down to the planet to try and get him off this planetoid. But yeah, I love Deep Space Nine. Brock Peters, of course, played Admiral Cartwright in Star Trek, and we saw him again in Deep Space Nine. So I agree. I think the whole Sisko family, the Sisko family and the relationships the men have, because it's three dudes. All the ladies in that family are gone until Cassidy Yates enters the picture. Good stuff, totally. And I'm with you there. I am with you. I do love Deep Space Nine very much, and I completely agree with your assessment. Let's see, where am I? Brian Cruz is here. Brian Cruz sent in a letter. Hey, Rob, about a week ago, you took a letter of mine asking your advice about comic book suggestions for people trying to get back into reading comics. In that letter, I mentioned I'd already purchased a handful of Batman comics to read, and I just wanted to give you my thoughts about what I've read so far. First of all, I'm having an absolute blast rediscovering comics. I had a feeling this would be fun, but I did not realize it would be this much fun. I find myself only wanting to read comics during my free time. Somehow, in just over a week, while also working and doing college homework, I've managed to read The Killing Joke, Year One, The Long Halloween, as well as his sequel, Dark Victory. Tonight, I finished The Dark Knight Returns, and my goal is to read both its sequels, The Dark Knight Strikes Again and The Dark Knight Master Race, by the end of the week. I'll be very curious to hear what you think about The Dark Knight Strikes Again. I did, however, quite enjoy The Master Race. I won't waste your time by giving you a full detailed review about comics you already know about, but just my basic thoughts. The Killing Joke was fine, although the treatment of Barbara Gordon is somewhat problematic. I did go watch the animated movie after reading it. The movie is garbage. It is garbage. Year One was great, and it was cool how I kept noticing little shots or lines of dialogue that were used in Batman Begins. The Dark Knight Returns was amazing. I can see why it's near the top of just about every best graphic novels of all time list. I can also see why so many people compare it to Watchmen and RoboCop. The political satire in all three is very similar and brilliant. The best ones I've read so far are The Long Halloween and Dark Victory. I finished both in 2 days. I couldn't put them down. They were just so well written and entertaining. I could see these two becoming yearly reads. But my favorite thing about reading all of these is a silly one. Hearing Danny Elfman's Batman theme song in my head whenever something epic happens, or hearing Kevin Conroy's voice in my head for the Batman dialogue and Mark Hamill's voice for the Joker dialogue. It's causing me to smile and laugh constantly. I feel like a kid watching Batman the Animated Series, the Tim Burton movies, or playing the Batman Arkham video games again. After I finish a few more Batman books, I plan on reading the entire Death of Superman run. And I have a strong feeling I will be singing the John Williams theme a lot. Not only do you have to read Death of Superman, you also have to follow it up with Reign of Superman. There's a great, if you don't have it, there's a great hardcover that has all of it there. Best wishes, Brian Cruz. P.S. I took your advice and I purchased the comics Kingdom Come and Crisis on Infinite Earths. These look great and I plan on getting to them soon. Well, I think you will quite enjoy them. Read Crisis first, though. And remember, when you read Crisis, put yourself in the mindset of DC readers at the time when there was Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth S. There was all these multiple Earths and continuities and craziness. And then Crisis on Infinite Earths came out, and it was mind-blowing. I loved it so much when I first read it. And then read Kingdom Come later, which is still to this day, it is, in fact, a masterpiece. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've waited. I know you might have heard me mention this earlier in the chat, but guess who's here? Yes, that's right. Willow Yang. Willow Yang sent in another letter, and when Willow writes, she's the E.F. Hutton of Robservations. When Willow writes, people listen. Take it away, Willow Yang. Greetings, Rob. After your show this Monday, Robservations number 249. Oh my God, it's so weird to see that in print. I found myself reflecting back on my high school years and lamenting that I haven't watched as many movies in theaters as I could have when I still had the time to do it. I'm currently a little too young to see myself as having one foot in the grave, but I do often reminisce for long for the good old days of the 2000s. Back then, the days just seemed to be much longer. I had so much more time on my hands and I could spend it all with my friends. While I live in Vancouver, the theater that was closest to my home and most easily accessible by bus was actually located in the adjacent city, Burnaby, inside a large shopping mall. When I was in high school, the theater was called Silver City. It has since been acquired by Cineplex, who has now practically monopolized all the theaters in Canada. I'd often go there with my friends over the weekends. We admittedly weren't the most upstanding citizens back then. We'd lie about our age and claim that we're 13 to get cheaper tickets. We'd often sneak in food that we brought in from the mall. In my defense, however, I didn't know that theaters made the bulk of their revenue from concessions. I'd always assumed that it was from ticket sales. When we didn't go out to the theaters, we'd often watch movies over at one of my friends' places. Her parents owned a large collection of DVDs, a number of which I'm ashamed to admit were probably illegally copied. One of our favorite movies to watch together was Stephen Chow's Shaolin Soccer. I have Shaolin Soccer on DVD. I got it from 5 Star Laser, I think. Which is you can buy Asian discs. My friends who all spoke Cantonese would always insist on watching the original Cantonese version rather than the Mandarin dubbed one because they claimed it was funnier with more swear words. Even though I might not have the same level of enjoyment as them, the movie is still an absolute blast, an experience that is only enhanced when it's being shared between a group of people. It became considerably harder for us to meet up after we've graduated from high school. Some of us went to different colleges and we were enrolled in different programs with different classes and schedules, so it became much more difficult for us to see each other. The last time we've had everyone get together was during the release of Tom Hooper's Les Miserables. About a dozen of us went over to the Scotiabank Theater, which is also owned by Cineplex, in downtown to watch the movie together. Unfortunately, we made the grievous mistake of entrusting one guy to purchase all the tickets for us in advance. You never leave it up to one guy. Now, we did not have assigned seating at the time, so we agreed to convene outside the theater at least half an hour early in order to get some decent seats. Well, the guy who had our tickets showed up about 5 minutes after the movie's listed showtime. Oh my God. Elizabeth will tell you, I can't go into movies after they've started. I can't do it. By the time we finally got inside the theater, it was already jam-packed, and the only seats that were available were at the very front row. Staring up at the screen with my head tilted backwards for 2.5 hours proved to be a literal pain in the neck. I had to look away intermittently because I was getting nauseous. I didn't have the courage to give the late guy a piece of my mind, but it was the last time that I entrusted someone to buy tickets for me. As crappy as the movie experience was, however, we still had a lot of fun together. Walking through the streets of downtown en route to a nearby Earl's restaurant for dinner, a few people in the group started singing, "Do You Hear the People Sing?" Others joined in, and eventually all of us were belting songs from Les Miserables together in public, much to the dismay of passersby. I've lost touch with many of my high school friends over the years. Some of them have moved to different provinces or out of the country. Some have gotten married and have children of their own. Even the friends who are living nearby are preoccupied now with jobs and other responsibilities that come with the adult life. We are lucky if we can meet up just a couple of times a year to watch a Star Wars or comic book movie. I'm sometimes just bewildered by how fast time seems to be passing by now. When I was in high school, I was able to binge anime series, read books, write stories, and play hours of online role-playing games on a daily basis. Now I only have time to watch one episode of Star Trek a day. It's only on weekends that I might be able to find just a few spare hours to see a movie on Netflix or YouTube. I still haven't even seen Joker yet. I want to go with my friends, but it's been difficult for us to find time in our busy schedules to meet up. I'm embarrassed to admit that I haven't read any new novels in the past couple of years. The only stuff that's sitting on my bookshelf right now are volumes of biochemistry and enzymology textbooks and stacks of scientific papers. Sometimes I wish I'd made better use of my time when I was younger, that I could read more books and watch more films instead of spending hours fishing for lobsters on RuneScape. You can fish for lobsters on RuneScape? with the deluge of new content that we've been receiving in recent years, I really wonder now if I'd ever be able to catch up on all the classics that I'd missed. I would like to wrap this letter up with another regret I have. Whenever I reflect back on my adolescent memories, I always remember one particularly douchey thing that I did back in the 11th grade. It was after school, and I was in the cafeteria with several of my classmates working on an English project. One of the people there was John, and if you might remember from my previous letters, this guy was a true original geek with a great passion for Star Wars and Star Trek, as well as an incredible knowledge of classic films. He was also the person responsible for introducing my friends and I to Watchmen. Anyways, we were working, and at one point I was holding a permanent marker in my hand, and John's back was turned towards me. I just couldn't resist. I wrote the F word on his shirt while he wasn't looking. Please don't ask me why. I just thought it was funny at the time. It wasn't long before someone noticed and pointed it out to John. He thought that it was my friend who had vandalized his shirt and smacked her on the side of her head in retaliation. I don't believe he actually meant to hurt her, but unfortunately, he hit her glasses and the frame cut her face. She broke into tears. It was such an awkward and uncomfortable incident, and I just felt terrible, both for my friend and for John, who skipped school for a couple of days to avoid us. I never did fess up to my crime. My friend did ask me about it, seeing that I was the most likely culprit, but I lied and denied because I was too ashamed to admit it. I have all but lost contact with John, unfortunately. He moved to another province after graduation. The last I've heard, he'd enrolled in film school to pursue his passion for filmmaking. I wish that I could have stayed in touch with him. I think that he would have loved your channel. You two seem to have very similar interests and tastes, in spite of being about a generation apart. Have you ever done something so stupid and douchey that you were embarrassed to fess up to? Yours sincerely, Willow. Well, first of all, this was like Stand By Me in a whole letter, the entirety of Stand By Me in one letter. Have I ever done something stupid and douchey that you were embarrassed to fess up to? That I was embarrassed to fess up to? I don't know. I usually get caught because I'm not a very good liar and everybody knows, and I always get in trouble. Stupid and douchey. I don't think I don't think stupid and douchey. I've done lots of douchey things. I've done lots of stupid things, but I don't know if they were stupid and douchey. I have to think about that. I'm going to do a whole chat on this. I'm going to come up with something. I will come up with something. But this is a great letter, Willow. I got to tell you, I mean, here I start talking about Mark Zuckerberg, and I'm having what a great bunch of letters from all of you people today. I feel like, my God, this was what an emotional Robservations this has been. I don't even know what to say. Pretty amazing, you guys. I mean, again, why do I like doing these shows? I mean, I thought, just when you think that, wow, 250 shows and how much more do you have to say? Show number 251 comes along, and boom, suddenly everybody's like in a confessional kind of mood, an interesting kind of mood. I love you guys. I love the Post-Geek Singularity community. We have the best community, by the way, on YouTube. We do. We really do. You guys are the best people on YouTube. Travis Rayner again sends in super chat. Thanks, Travis, 2 in a row. What do you think of the low budget 80s sci-fi and fantasy movies? Hawk the Slayer and Yor the Hunter from the Future. I happen to enjoy these cheesy movies. Well, ladies and gentlemen, both Hawk the Slayer and Yor are basically, prehistoric movies, not kind of. Some of them I enjoy, and some of them I like low budget movies, but I tend to gravitate more toward the low budget movies. When I think about ultra low budget sci-fi films that I have loved, it's hard for me to like Hawk the Slayer and Yor. It is. I think about, when you're talking about, I think about more highbrow movies like Don Coscarelli's The Beastmaster. What I do like about these movies, especially at the time, it was really hard because you have to remember the 80s were an amazing time because you still got low budget grade Z type of movies. But then on the other hand, some of the science fiction and fantasy films, like you could watch a Hawk the Slayer and Yor, and then you could rock Conan the Barbarian, which is all of these movies are sort of riffs on Conan, because Conan was a sword and sorcery movie that was very highbrow. It was made by John Milius. Of course, Schwarzenegger's big breakthrough, Sandahl Bergman, James Earl Jones, Mako. It was Basil Polidoris's amazing score. It was pretty highbrow, but a movie like Conan was easy to knock off. You could easily make a B version of it, because you just get a strong man and, you shoot in the desert. So there was a lot of that going on. And the problem was when you got Conan the Barbarian, and remember in 82, was it May of 82, when Conan came out, it was new. No one had made a sword and sorcery epic like this, but then it gave way to movies like The Sword and the Sorcerer, and varying degrees of that. Now, I saw those, and most of them I went and saw in the theater when I could. If not, you'd catch up with them on video. There was a lot of like Italian ripoffs of Mad Max and Escape from New York, or both. There was a lot of craziness. There was a lot of these movies would come out and they were easily knocked off because Escape from New York was low budget in the first place. Most of it was shot in St. Louis, that burnt out part of St. Louis, and in LA. So it was a heady time. But I did watch them. I didn't love them though, because once you got, and how many Alien ripoffs were there? As much as I loved Alien, I gotta say, watching those Alien ripoffs like Creature or Forbidden World, Galaxy of Terror. I love Galaxy of Terror. Aaron Moran from Happy Days gets raped by a giant worm, a giant centipede. These movies were goofy and weird, and Galaxy of Terror is bizarre, and it was weird. Like I was talking about Basket Case on one of these shows, and Basket Case is another weird movie. And these movies were equally low budget and sleazy and gore ridden, which everything about them I loved, to be honest. But when you had Conan, and I considered myself to have highbrow tastes, it was hard to go back and watch Hawk the Slayer or Yor the Hunter from the Future or any of these other barbarian movies when you already had. It's funny because when they made Conan the Destroyer, the sequel to Conan, it became a Conan ripoff, even though you still had Arnold Schwarzenegger in it. It seemed so cheesy and low budget. And then, of course, we got Red Sonja, which was even further down. But, you know, there's something charming about them. And a lot of these movies you could go see in a theater. So I dug them, you know, and I was younger. So I would watch all that stuff. You know, you were looking anything that had sex and violence and good fights in it and car crashes. And I would watched it all. It's great stuff. I mean, I miss those days because now it's either direct to video or it's low budget. And even Hawk the Slayer and Yor might be You're the Hunter from the Future. Even though they were low budget, there was something about them that was watchable, you know. And again, there was a whole tier like the American Ninja movies with Michael Dudikoff and Steve James, or just movies like Ninja 3: The Domination. I mean, there was lots of craziness. How could you not watch it? It was a great time to grow up, and we are sort of missing that now, which is, you know, in a way, kind of a bummer. The Richard's back here. He says, you gathered us here. So cheers and thank you. Well, I didn't gather you here. I just opened the door. You guys showed up and you keep coming back. It's great. I'd like to think it's collectively about the community. Mark C says, earlier this week, you spoke of French cinema. You need to sell City of Lost Children to the chat without spoiling what they're in for. Okay. First of all, everyone knows that Elizabeth and I love Jean-Pierre Jeunet's Amélie. Amélie is one of my favorite movies of all time. But Jean-Pierre Jeunet, before he made Alien Resurrection, came to America, he worked with a guy named Marc Caro, and they made two quintessential films that are must-sees. If you're an imagination connoisseur and you have not seen both of these movies, not just City of Lost Children, you must see City of Lost Children and Delicatessen. Now, I'm not going to get into what they're about. I won't ruin them. I will just say that you cannot be a film fan or an imagination connoisseur without having watched both Delicatessen and City of Lost Children. And to be fair, you also have to have seen Amélie. But Amélie was after, it wasn't Marc Caro and Jean-Pierre Jeunet. It was just Jean-Pierre Jeunet. But you've got to watch Delicatessen, City of Lost Children. Both of them. You have to. Everybody. Mark C is right. You owe it to yourselves. Watch those movies. JB Bonifacio says, do you like Henwick in Matrix or Dano in the Batman movie more? Henwick was cast yesterday we know that she was cast yesterday as perhaps the lead in the new Matrix, or Paul Dano in the Batman movie more. I think, look, both castings are great. For those of you who don't know, Paul Dano was cast as the Riddler in Matt Reeves' Batman movie today. I think both of those castings are great, and I'm looking forward to it. I wouldn't take one over the other. I think both movies. First of all, isn't it interesting that the most exciting thing going in terms of the last couple days in terms of movies are both Warner Brothers films? I mean, I don't know if it's because they feel re-energized after the success of Joker, and they know they got Wonder Woman, and they've got the Birds of Prey movie coming down, and they're stoked about what James Gunn is doing with Suicide Squad. But either way, the fact that we're getting Matrix 4 and a new Batman movie, and the casting seems to be spot on, let me tell you, that just excites me. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, gentle beings, people from all over the world, I'm going to bring this, Robservations, the show about something, Robservations chat number 251 to an end. I can't thank you all enough. I mean, my God, the participation today, I feel breathless. What an interesting show this was. I want to thank you all for making it interesting. I want to thank you all for being you. I want to thank my moderator staff. I want to thank the great Terry, the Sheriff of Nottingham, Detective Jim. I want to thank Greg Smith up building his one. I want to imagine that Greg Smith does not have a job, even though he builds houses with his bare hands and fixes cars and does all kinds of things. He really is building a 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder from the Empire Strikes Back for the Emerald City Comic Con next year. By the way, I want to go to the Emerald City Comic Con. It's my hometown. I've never been there. Who do I have to talk to? I don't know. I know no one there, and I'm surprised. I've never been asked to go. Not that I, should be, but it is the 10th anniversary of the Hills Run Red. It was the 20th anniversary of free enterprise. I mean, I'm kind of a hometown guy makes good. I went to Evergreen. So get on that. But anyway, I want to thank all of you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel. You please hit like and please subscribe if you haven't. And if you want to, if you don't, you think I'm a monumental douche gold, then you don't. But as Gary Beekler will tell you at Nerdrotic, they've changed the algorithms on YouTube. So every like helps and subscribers help as well. So thank you for participating. I will be back tomorrow. I don't know when. I might be doing Inglorious Trexperts. I don't know what's going on. It's in flux. Who knows? But as always, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And remember, you can go to the Burnettwork website, burnettwork.net, and read the letters that I read here. Although we're behind, I freely admit that. And we're gonna catch up soon. Anyway, my name is Robert Meyer Burnett. This is Robservations, a show about something. And I will say, as always, everyone, as I bring this chat to a close, have a better day.